Australia's business channel. This is Mediaweek.
Hello and welcome to the program. Ahead, we're going to be finding out what Seven and Southern Cross Austereo had to say in their full year reports. Darren Hinch sacked from 3AW. Will he ever be back? Radio rivals broadcast side by side at the Digital Radio 3rd anniversary party. And Tony Hale from the Newspaper Works joins us to give us the latest on sales and readership trends. But first, to the troubles at 10 Network, which has seen its Chief Programming Officer David Mott quit and ratings hit record lows this week. Well, to tell us more, we're joined by our co-host, James Manning, the editor and publisher of Mediaweek. James, just firstly, on David Mott, I mean, we've spoken to him a number of times.
Sure.
Just looking at what happened, I mean, is there any kind of detail yet on whether he jumped or he was pushed or...?
No, I guess the thing that really matters is he's not there anymore. You know, their ratings got to such a point where something really had to be done, I guess, in changing the personnel behind the scenes, getting those shows together. The big programs we talked about that haven't worked over the last couple of weeks, they were sort of announced, I think, at James Warburton's first public sort of outing for the network when we had him on the show back at the start of the year nearly. And they just haven't gelled, so they just really need to do something about it. Any
idea if he'll replace him yet?
No, there's some internal candidates who might be good, you know. I think Beverly McGarvey's sort of head of this programming there under David, so she's sort of filling in for him as well as doing her own role at the moment. She's probably the most likely internal candidate perhaps. They've got a programmer in Melbourne who's quite good, but otherwise it's probably a hard job to fill, you know. They could look internationally, but then people really sort of need to know what's working in the Australian market.
Looking at the ratings, you mentioned there just how tough the response has been to a number of those big program debuts. Sure. Just in the past week, what have we been seeing?
Yeah, just nothing really. No improvements. You know, they were knocked off by SBS in Melbourne on, I think, Tuesday night this week. So, you know, and they've been in 4th place nationally for the last fortnight now. So ABC won outrating them. And that's, you know, as we mentioned too last week, that's really going to hurt them when it comes around to ad rates for next year. You know, people are going to be using these figures, and you know, and the 10 have always been first in the past at coming forward with what's going to be happening next year. I think this time last year they were close to spruiking what they were doing for this year, but I think they'll certainly. There's been no talk at all about what they might have up their sleeve for next year. I mean, it's not the end of the world for them. They've still got some big franchises like MasterChef that'll be back, and we talked about maybe the MasterChef Professionals. They're going to have their new US shows, there's new series of Homeland, NCIS. You know, if they can sort of get these shows back into a regular slot every week, not shuffle them around, try and get some traction for a show like Good Wife, which, you know, is a great show, gets big audiences in the US. You know, so they've still got some highlights in their schedule. And
in terms of ad rate negotiations, what's happening? Because I mean, we've heard media buyers say before that they really want a strong third free-to-air network. It makes it much more competitive. But what have we been seeing in terms of that?
Yeah, well, media buyers will be talking it up a little bit, but they'll be reluctant to, you know, invest too much money there because it's really an unknown quantity. You know, we've heard talk that it, you know, their ad share could drop well below 20%. That's pretty frightening, I guess. But yeah, we heard Peter Wilshire was on not long ago from Nine, told us, you know, he might have a few sort of early 2013 rate negotiation discussions in London with people when they were over there for the Olympic Games. So there is talk already underway, but it's hard to know how it's going to be. There's been some crazy rumours around, like even talk that, you know, could David Leckie maybe end up at Channel 10? Speculation he might have only had a 6-month contract at 7, so he might be a free agent by the end of the year. You've got to think there'd be a no-compete clause in there somewhere, and given the legal sort of fights they went through last year, it'd be very weird to see him turning up at 10.
Yeah, so watch this space then.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Let's just turn as well to, of course, the low ratings for 10's programming also hurting the market share of regional affiliate Southern Cross Austereo in the year to June. Still in its first full year result since merging with Austereo last year, the company turned in a solid net profit of $95 million, up 48%. Well, here's what the CEO, Rhys Holleran, had to say about the impact of those TV ratings.
Well, clearly we are having lower ratings, and as a result of that we are producing lower market shares, and that's reflected in our numbers today. There's no getting away from that. Look, we're doing our best we can in what's a difficult market and with some difficult ratings.
And he was also asked about the outlook for ad markets.
I think it's a hard question to answer. The Olympic Games certainly don't help that analysis. A lot of money gets sucked out of the market during that period, during the Olympics, and it doesn't, you know, the normal trends don't apply. So we're working through that. It's certainly a difficult market. What it will be in the first half of financial year 13, or the second half of financial year 13, but the first half of the calendar year, I'm not sure. I think the markets are very short and they're hard to read.
So obviously a difficult time ahead, difficult to predict from what Rhys Holleran was saying there. What did they have to say about Network 10 and also, of course, the performance of the radio business, given the impact of the ad boycott of Kyle Sandilands' show as well? Sure,
yeah. Look, he said, look, there's not much they can do about the TV. They don't have much of an input. They're just an affiliate, so they really have to take what 10 gives them. They have their own programming in some fringe areas, but that sort of doesn't bring in big revenues. He did say, look, we have every confidence in 10, so they're really hoping that 10 will get it together and get some ratings back on the board. About the radio business, they said, look, there has been an impact for Today Network, particularly in Sydney and around the network in Drive, which surprised me a little bit because Fifi and Jules have held on to ratings pretty well, but they said they just haven't been able to monetise that slot as well as they did for Hamish and Andy. They played down the impact of Today FM in Sydney and Kyle Sandilands. We asked him about Kyle's contract. We said, look, we don't talk about contracts. And he said, look, he hopes that's behind them. Well, sure, the controversies are behind them, I think, regarding Kyle, but there still seems to be some material impact. He said, look, it's not significant.
OK. All right, let's just turn now to another regional media company, Prime Media, seeing its audience and ad revenue market share grow in the 2012 financial year, reporting a near 2% rise in profit to 27 million. Helped along, no doubt, by the Seven programming it broadcasts. Seven Group, of course, meanwhile, also reporting this week and remaining coy about whether it's going to launch any rival bid to News Limited's takeover for pay TV owner Consolidated Media. Well, for more on all of this, we're joined now by Chris Weston from IG Markets. Chris, just firstly on the Seven Group numbers, what did you think?
I think they're actually good numbers, Bridie. I think the market seemed to like them as well. The stock was up 5.2% on the day. It's given back a bit today. I think it's down about 2.5%, so it's still up about nearly 2% since it actually announced. But the numbers were good. I mean, let's look at the actual growth that came through. The net profit came out at 343 million, which was about 13% above the expectations. The gross operating cash flow that's coming through this business was significant. They were negative 200 odd million last in the first half. They've now swung that round to about 90 odd million. The growth is coming through the Westrack side of things. So in terms of the media assets, they're still not performing particularly well, given they've got that 33% stake still in Seven West Media, the stake in Consolidated Media. Still the buzz around whether they're going to make a counterbid, whether they're going to sell to News Corp. They're staying very coy on that, as you say. But the earnings themselves were very good in terms of operating cash flow compared to the market, and the market rewarded them. I think longer term, still a very cheap company here.
Just looking at some of the other news out this week, we were mentioning there the Southern Cross Austereo results as well. What did you make of those, and just what other stocks you're watching, media stocks you're watching on the market?
Well, I don't think you can go past Fairfax at the moment. The stock's just really teetering on that all-time low today at 44.5 cents, down 37% year to date now as well. And everyone's asking exactly what's going to be the catalyst to drive them higher. It doesn't look like anything's going to come through. We obviously talked about the earnings last week. People are wanting to know what that catalyst is to actually cause some buying, because the consensus target is we're going to get to around 61 cents on a 12-month basis. I don't think we're going to get there personally at the moment, but there's still a lot of controversy around that company. Southern Cross Media name you talked about there, I mean, on the day it was up 1.2%. It's given back some of that today. It's a valuation stock, trading on about 8.1 times. Got a great dividend yield, just a 9% fully franked dividend yield there, great dividend yield, and it's got really good free cash flow. But the numbers themselves were okay. They're in line with the market looking for. Bit of concern on the TV side of things. We've seen that really dissipate towards the second half. But I think it's one that is on a valuation basis probably a very good place to be, especially that 9% fully franked dividend yield there.
All right, Chris, thanks as always.
Thanks.
Newspaper publishers are gearing up to honour the best in the business at the annual Newspaper of the Year Awards next Thursday. Well, this all comes, of course, at a tough time with declining sales, the rise of digital consumption, leading to major restructures at two of the biggest publishers, Fairfax and News Limited. Well, to give us an update on the health of the sector and tell us a bit more about the awards coming up, we're joined now by the CEO of the Newspaper Works, Tony Hale. Tony, thanks for coming on the show.
Good to be here.
Good to see you. Now, just looking at the trends, because obviously there's a lot talked about and speculated about with what's happening with newspapers and, you know, the looming death of newspapers. What are we seeing in the trend? I mean, is it slowing the decline or is it speeding up? What are you seeing?
Well, the ABC figures came out for circulation not so long ago. That's paid circulation. And you saw that the overall newspaper result was down about 5.5%, which was in line with expectation. It's probably a little higher than we would like, obviously, but consistent with what's happening. Of course, Fairfax is still going through the process of shedding some of their unprofitable sales, which makes it probably look a bit higher than it is. But there's some strong performers in there as well. You saw that mastheads like the Australian, the Daily Telegraph, Adelaide Advertiser, Perth West Australian are all holding ground, which is good. And I think in the mix for print, there's a long time left to go for printed newspapers, if they ever fold. We've still got about 18.5 million newspapers bought every single week, and the PwC report estimates that Australians are paying $1.2 or $3 billion purchasing newspapers every year. So it's a very large number of newspapers out there on a weekly basis. Still a long way to go with printed newspapers.
When you sit in your board meeting and you have representatives from all your members, is there a unified sort of stance on the future of print? And you probably won't want to say name names, but does some have a stronger sort of confidence about the future of print, while others might be sort of shoring up an alternative quicker than the others?
No, I think you find all of them have a great deal of confidence about print, but that doesn't stop them pursuing different business models. Probably the most conservative or print-focused would be Seven West Media with the West Australian. They're doing very well in print. Probably the one undergoing the most radical structural change would be Fairfax, partially due to the fact that they've been very successful attracting substantial digital audiences, and they see that the way of the future. But, you know, there's no way that Fairfax are moving away from print. They did announce that a couple of print centres were closing. They were the bigger ones, but they've got 14 print centres around Australia that are higher quality, more efficient, and they're going to focus on those for the run. So, you know, Fairfax is still very, very much into print.
Very big night for the industry, of course, next Thursday night, the Newspaper of the Year Awards. How have the award categories, how are they reflecting, I guess, the rise in digital consumption?
Well, interestingly, we had record entries this year, well over 1,000 entries. The two biggest growing areas are one very traditional, one very new. The traditional one being photography. More and more photography awards from papers all over Australia, which is a very popular area. But the other thing that happened is that the categories for the digital were split this year for the digital news digital destinations into web and then mobile and app. So we're getting more entries. I think the total entries into digital grew by about 30%. There's also digital innovation, and there's also some niche sites in there as well. So I think you see the entries following the evolution of newspapers as they move more and more to digital.
Will we see a tablet edition of the year shortly, or have you got that already?
I think that's in there.
Is it?
That's in there, yeah.
And will the Newspaper of the Year award, will that soon have to... I mean, is that strictly for the print newspaper?
Absolutely not.
It's not, so
No.
It does take into account...
Yeah, all newspapers, whatever's published, whatever they publish under a masthead.
Okay.
Just wondering as well if you were able to give us any update on the readership measurement changeover as well, and when you might be releasing first data.
Yeah, well, that's well underway. We've now got 9 months of data collected, which is a massive amount.
We're going to get there one day, aren't we? We keep asking you this question every time.